Hello, everyone. This is Jay Coder, and right now I'm starting the stream on. It's going to be over testing in Android, and testing in Android is very important. Well, testing any application is very important so that you can make sure it's quality before you release a product, the final product and everything. So it is a good practice. So we're gonna go over that code lab today, and I want to welcome all of you here today. And I hope that you learned something interesting in the Android world today. And let's go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute the music here. And so we're going to be going over the collab, learn the basics of Android test. And like usual, I'm going to go ahead and post a link to this collab. I'm going to post it in the chat, and I post it in the description so people can be able to follow along. So I'm gonna go ahead and post that there in the chat. I've done that. And now let's go ahead and get started with this code lab. It's learn the basics of Android test. 1. Before you begin, the code lab teaches you about testing and how to apply automated testing in Android apps. Prerequisites: basic knowledge of how to navigate to project directories in Android Studio. What what you'll learn: what testing is, what automated testing is, what unit and instrumentation tests are, and where to find unit and instrumentation test files in an Android project. And what you need: a computer with Android Studio installed, the project you created in the previous collab in this pathway. So I'm gonna also say that it's a good skill to learn for testing. You're gonna find, if you aspire to be a professional Android developer, some companies require you to know how to run instrument tests and unit tests. So I would take the time to learn that before you have to use it in the real world. Or if you already are using it, you can be able to brush up on that. So all right. So the project you created in the previous code lab. So basically, it's a template that we had with named birthday, happy birthday. And so basically I'll show you guys that once we're on that section where we have to follow along in Android Studio. I'll make sure to demonstrate that on the screen for you guys. So don't worry about that. And what is testing? So, what is testing? Testing in the context of software is a structured method of checking your software to make sure it works correctly. Automated testing is actual code that checks to ensure that another piece of code you wrote is working correctly. Testing software is advantageous because it lets you weed out bugs before you release your code into the wild. It's essential to a positive user experience. While manual testing almost always has a place, testing in Android can often be automated. Throughout the Android Basics and Kotlin course, you focus on automated tests to test the app code and the functional requirements of the app itself. In this collab, you learn the very basics of testing in Android. In later collabs, you learn more advanced practices of testing Android apps. As you become familiar with Android development and testing Android apps, you should make it a regular practice to write tests alongside your app code. Creating a test every time you create a new feature in your app reduces your workload later as your app grows. It also provides a convenient way for you to make sure your app works properly without spending too much time manually testing your app. All right. So, 3, introduction. So, an automated test is a piece of code that ensures another piece of code you have written is working correctly and continues to work correctly. As your project continues to grow and change, automated testing is an essential part of all software development, and Android development is no exception. As such, there is no better time to introduce it than right now. When you created your first Android app, you probably saw that your main activity was located in a subfolder of the main directory. In the source directory, you may have also noticed the test and Android test directories. These two directories are where test code is written. There are two types of automated tests in Android development: unit tests and instrumentation tests. The two directories represent these two categories of tests. Find the unit test code. Local tests in Android are located in the test directory. They are usually unit tests. Unit tests directly test a small piece of code to ensure it's functioning properly. With unit tests, you can test functions, classes, properties. Local tests are executed on the Java virtual machine, which means they can run in a development environment without needing a device emulator. This is a fancy way of saying that the unit tests run on your computer. Android Studio comes ready to run local tests automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Android Studio here, and I'm going to go ahead and open the Happy Birthday project. And so also I need to reveal my screen here so that you guys can also see my Android development, Android Studio, the Android Studio. So let me go ahead and also do that really quick here. I'm gonna go ahead and switch the screen here to go ahead and display capture. All right, you guys should be able to see my screen now. And all right, and I opened the Android Studio. Let's see. So inside the Android Studio, there are, like it was saying, there are two folders under your project, your main source code folder. So this is where your main project source code usually is, and then these two packages under it, which one says Android test and one says test. These are folders that you can use for your testing. So this one is your unit tests program file, and this is the instrumented test. So that's where you will find your test cases at. So, all right. So that's what the lesson was talking about so far. And let's go ahead and go back to the lesson. And so says find the unit test code. Local tests and Android are located in the test directory. they're usually unit tests. Unit tests directly test a small piece of code to ensure it's functioning to make sure it's functioning properly. With unit tests, you can test functions, classes, properties. Local tests are executed on the Java virtual machine, which means they run in a development environment. So yeah, I was reading that earlier that it runs in the development environment. So Android Studio automatically generates simple unit tests each time you create a new project. The same thing happens for instrumentation tests. It's important to note that these tests don't really do anything relevant. They only serve as a placeholder. For now, you're only going to go over where to find the test files. You dive into the content of these generated tests and later pathways. So, to find the unit test code, open the birthday card app from the previous project. If necessary, select Android from the navigation menu. Click App, Java, com.example.happy birthday test, and example unit test. So, yeah, like this screenshot says, and I also showed you guys earlier that they wanted us to click on the example unit test. So you'll find that in com.sample.happybirthday or any other template that you make. It usually it will automatically generate these two folders, these two packages, the Android test and the test, and then your unit test case will be in here, which this one is an example, of course. So all right, so find the instrumentation test code. In the context of Android development, instrumentation test is the term for what is usually a user interface test, UI test. Instrumentation tests lets you test parts of an app that depends on activity and fragment life cycles and platform APIs and services. So make sure that's clear that instrumentation test is kind of a fancy word, but it just means UI test. Unlike unit tests, UI tests don't test code directly. Instead, they test the user interface to make sure that the correct UI components are displayed and that the user interface behaves as expected when actions are taken with the UI. Another difference is that all instrumentation tests must run on a physical device or emulator. In an earlier pathway, you set up an emulator. So this step is already taken care of. When you run an instrumentation test on Android, what's really happening is that the test code is actually built into its own APK. Just like a regular Android app, an APK is a compressed file that contains all the code and necessary files to run the app on a device or emulator. That test APK is installed on the device or emulator along with the regular app APK. The test APK then runs its tests against the app APK. Before you run the test, take a look at what the code looks like. Define instrumentation test code 1. If you're in the Android project, view click app java com.happy birthday Android test example instrumented test. All right, so this is the screenshot for it. And if you are in the project view, click the Happy Birthday App Source, Android Test, Java, com.example.happy birthday, example, instrumented test. All right, so we can go ahead and do that in the Android Studio. So in the Android Studio, we are here in the um, and, well, that's the unit test. They want us to be in the example instrumented test. All right, all right. So we are there, and then next, congratulations, you learn what testing in Android is and how to find unit and instrumentation tests in Android. All right, great. So this is the main thing that they wanted us to point out is how can we find these things in the actual IDE? And so great. So let me just let me see. So inside the unit test, you have addition is correct. Assert equals. So expected for actual. So let me see if when we run this. So we're running the unit test right now. All right. All right. Executed task. Okay. And okay, so test results. Green check mark. And it's green right there. Looks like that actually passed. I wonder, let's change this to 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. Let's run the example test. And then, oh no, it says expected 4, actual 5. So it's incorrect. So the assertion failed. All right. So when you come here, this is the instrumented test. So with the instrumented test, it actually brings up the actual user interface here. So right now it's running our app. This screen doesn't have anything to do with the application. The screen is just here from a previous time I was running um, an app, but right now it looks like it's still loading. So the actual app that it's going to pull up is still loading. So in case you guys are confused, that's nothing to do with the app we're checking. But all right, so okay, so it looks like it performed the test and completed it. Like in this case, I mean, we're not really doing anything, and it's just, let's see, assert equals this package name. Looks like it's just checking if the package name is correct. So it doesn't look like there's testing anything in the UI right now. But anyway, the point of this whole exercise was to make sure you guys know the locations of the unit test and the instrumented test. And the instrumented test is just a fancy word for UI test. All right. So I'm going to close that. And all right. So that actually is going to conclude our live stream today. And I thank you guys for watching, subscribe, and also comment on anything that you want to say, like any feedback you have for me, any questions you have about the lesson. And I'll see you guys next time. Stay coding. All right. Have a wonderful day.